Hi everyone, welcome to the March 18th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and this weekend we're looking ahead to Saturday's card at Aqueduct, a track that we haven't spent too much time on lately, but looking around the country to see where the interesting racing was taking place this weekend. I know Oaklawn was a candidate. They've got a couple of graded stakes on tap there, I believe the Essex and the Whitmore, but on Saturday at Aqueduct they've got a pretty nice card on tap. I think the average starters per race is about 10.5 throughout the day. The late pick 5 sequence is pretty interesting, so Craig and I are going to go over those last 5 races on the card. The feature at Aqueduct is the Cicada Stakes for the 3-year-old fillies. Just a field of 6 signed on there, but don't let that fool you. That is certainly not an easy race to handicap, and Craig, I feel like I threw you a bit of a curveball because I know I had some trouble handicapping this sequence.
Yeah, it's big fields, but definitely some couple puzzling races, but I found it really interesting, so I'm good with it. I've talked myself into I'm going to play this pick 5. We'll get into that more, obviously, but it won't be on a huge ticket, but I'm going to try to hit it because I do think there are some pretty interesting races.
Yeah, as I said, that feature is the Cicada. That's the one stakes race in the sequence. We've got an allowance race for New York breds with a pretty big field. We've got a starter allowance race before that and a couple of very wide open maiden races. And Craig, that's what we're going to start off, race 6 on this 10 race card that kicks off the late pick 5 sequence. That is one of those maiden special weight races for the New York breds, going 6.5 furlongs for the male horses. We've got a field of, or I should say the male horses. We've got a field of 14 signed on, though 13 betting interests, as there is a Steve Klasaris entry in this race. I feel like the clear favorite is going to be the Chad Brown trainee. No surprise there. Chad Brown's just been tearing it up at Aqueduct recently, but he's bringing Tin Pan Alley back off a pretty long layoff. This horse definitely ran well last summer as a 2-year-old at Saratoga, but it's a pretty long layoff for a horse that could be a shortish price, and I think there are a lot of other options in this race.
And Alley, I'm definitely going to be using him. Just looking at the horse that who beat him last time, Rotney, that one's come back and he's turned out to be a pretty good horse. He's had a couple nice wins since that day, including a really big win with a 108 speed figure last time. And as usual, I'm not going to pay a whole lot of attention to the 79 speed figure. I mean, that came as an early August 2-year-old at Saratoga. I would certainly expect better. And the one thing I really like is this horse has actually been training down in Florida. I do think that gives horses an edge when they ship up north this time of year, where we're going to see a lot more of that coming up soon. But I just think that's an advantage. So he's one as a straight bet. I certainly wouldn't be rushing to bet him at the windows. He's probably not going to offer a lot of value, but I wouldn't want to get knocked out early using him. And when I look at some of the others in here, Eminency is probably the next most logical winner, I would say, based on form, but I've really got my question marks about him, and I much prefer Tin Pan Alley. Mostly because he's a horse who's been beaten twice in a row at even money, and not particularly, once he ran 4th, beaten less than a length by what I think's not the strongest field. It was won by Hot Stepper, and then Pineapple Man took a kind of a big jump forward, but I do worry about horses like him. So there's another horse I want to touch on, but I'll send it back to you first.
Yeah, we have a pretty similar take on those two likely top choices from the public standpoint, as Eminency, as you said, has just had his chances at short prices. And from a speed figure standpoint, he's definitely the fastest horse in this race. It just feels like he was supposed to have gotten it done already. He was facing a much weaker field in this 2 back when he lost, finishing actually off the board in 4th. And then last time, maybe he didn't want to go the mile, but still, he was hard ridden that day and was just pretty flat through the stretch of that race. So I'm kind of against him in this race because I do think that there are multiple more interesting options. As for Tin Pan Alley, it's hard to make a horse too short on the morning line when you've got 13 betting interests. I'm not going to be surprised if he gets bet down to the 5-2, 2-1 range or pretty low, because it just seems like they can't get enough of these Chad Brown horses lately, and rightly so. He's been winning at a high rate. I did look up some very specific stats for Chad Brown in this situation. 6-month to 12-month layoffs with maidens on the dirt 3rd at Aqueduct. He's 5 for 10 over the past 5 years. That's a 50% win rate with a 317 ROI. So, I mean, no surprise that Chad Brown can win with these types of horses off long layoffs. And I actually did Tin Pan Alley on one of my horses to watch videos last summer at Saratoga because his debut was worth a watch. It was actually a really nice effort. He was off slowly that day. He made this big middle move into the race around the far turn to get himself into contention and just kind of flattened out in the late stages. But Craig, as you were saying, no disgrace losing to that winner, Rodney, who's done good things since then. So he's definitely the horse to beat in here. I just think kicking off this pick 5 sequence, it's a matter of price, how short you want to go, whether or not you want to veer in a different direction if he takes too much money. Craig, I'm imagining one of the horses that you said you were interested in is one of the other second-time starters in this race. I think there are 2 other interesting ones. The one that I'm slightly more favorable to is the number 7 Modern Midas. This is actually another horse that I highlighted on my Horses to Watch video series for his debut effort. Kind of a similar situation to Tin Pan Alley. Well, he didn't do quite as much running as that horse. He was badly compromised at the start when he made his debut here at Aqueduct about a month ago. If you watch the head-on at the start of that race, he gets slammed twice really hard from both sides, just kind of got totally discombobulated coming out of the gate, found himself towards the back of the pack, made up some mild ground in the late stages, but do note that through the stretch of that race, he was hanging on his left lead the entire way, so just felt like a horse that wasn't totally focused on the task. Jeremiah Engelhardt has good numbers with second-time starters, especially in dirt sprints at Aqueduct, so I just feel like he's a candidate to take a step forward, and horses like this that have trouble at the start, when they come back for their second starts of their career, I feel like they're liable to show a lot more early speed.
Yeah, he was definitely one of the ones I wanted to bring up. I don't really have a whole lot to add. I think he's going to be pretty dangerous in here. And the other one that I wanted to talk about is just to his outside, and that's Flowing River. He had a little bit of trouble at the start last time, not near as much as Modern Midas did. But what intrigues me about him is, for one, Anthony Dutrow, he doesn't have a whole lot of stats anymore because he had that layoff where he wasn't running a lot, if any, horses. But I do remember he always improved his horse's second time out. And he's a guy that basically never wins first time out, even when he was going well. His horses just weren't well meant that first time out, and second time they are. So I think Flowing River is going to be well intended. And the second point is he's taken a pretty substantial drop down, in my opinion. Not only was it an open maiden special weight as opposed to a New York bred, but it was a really strong race. The top 2 both ran mid 100 TimeformUS speed figures. Nobody's run back from that race yet, but it looked pretty strong coming in and going in, and I just think his effort was a lot better than would probably be shown in the running line, and expect big improvement today on Saturday.
Yeah, we're in total agreement about that. Those 2 second-time starters towards the middle of the field, Modern Midas and Flowing River, they'd be the 2 horses that I'm most interested in at bigger prices than Tin Pan Alley. And yeah, I think you covered Flowing River really well, that Tony Dutrow angle. It's something that's worked going back a number of years, and I don't think it would be a big surprise if it worked again here on this horse. There are a number of first-time starters in this race, Craig. I tried to do as much digging as I could on them. I didn't find out too much. I'd be a little surprised if any of them were particularly live on the tote board. The one that I think is maybe the most interesting, that could fly a little bit under the radar, is the number 10, Touch of a Buzz, going out for Kelly Breen. This horse does not have a ton of pedigree. He's a half-brother to a horse named Unlock the Potential, who was a decent allowance-type horse for Chad Brown and Clarvich Stables a number of years ago. He's by Outwork. I thought his 2-year-old sales work in March of last year was okay, but what's most interesting to me is that 34-1 gate work 2-back on March 3rd. The training track at Belmont does not play particularly fast. I mean, sometimes we see the gate works come out a little bit faster because I think the distance for those gate works is sometimes a little bit less than what's published in the form, but still, I mean, if you look at the history of that day, I think this gate work was almost 2 seconds faster than the next fastest work at that distance on March 3rd, so not going to be surprised if this horse has some early speed, and I think that's relevant in this race because as you look through those who have run, and if you kind of are in TimeformUS and check out the TimeformUS preview screen and just scan down the early pace ratings for all of the horses with experience, nobody has that much speed in this race. We don't project a pace projector when there are so many first-time starters, but it feels like a race where, and if any of the firsters have some early speed, they could get in front of this field. So maybe a horse like that can be prominent early, and I don't want to totally dismiss the firsters for that reason.
Yeah, he was the only firster that I could find any interest in, partly because of that work. And just the others, I didn't see a whole lot to go on. So it will be interesting. I think it's a good thing we're going to get to see the board for this race. In particular for this horse, he was the one I had in mind, because off that work, you would think he's going to take some money.
Let's move on to the second race in this sequence, race 7. It is a starter, 50,000, optional claiming 50,000. So horses can either race for that 50,000 optional tag, or it's a starter allowance for horses that have previously raced for the $50,000 tag. I know those conditions can be sometimes a little bit confusing. This race is for the 3-year-old fillies going the 6 furlong distance. And Craig, this is another pretty wide open affair. I think the conversation probably has to start towards the outside. I made the number 10 tweaked, the slight favorite on the morning line, and I really don't know exactly what to do with her. If she was coming into this race off her debut, she'd be justifiably a pretty short price in this race, but you have to be a little bit confused by her last race when she just didn't show up.
Yeah, I don't know if I would personally say she didn't show up at all. I thought the inside was kind of an advantage that day. She was dueling and pretty quick not really dueling, but she was up front early before kind of packing it in while outside. So I don't want to totally write off that race. And she's one I'm going to use because, as you say, that debut was good enough that if that was her only running line, she would probably be a prohibitive favorite in here. I do have some concerns of the horse just to her inside, though, who is pretty fast as well. And I'm wondering if these two are going to go at it early, particularly from those outside posts, trying to get to the inside and save some ground before that turn. So I do think it's an interesting race. I like that you brought up the conditions because, I don't often read race conditions, but for these kind I do. And it's one where it does kind of help and see who's in for a tag and who's not and who met all the conditions. So just a side note there that sometimes it is worth pulling them up. I was a little confused in this race. The other horse, a horse that I am interested in, is just to the inside of those two, and that's Lanfrancophile. She's a filly who I think it's going to set up nicely for, because I do think these two we talked about, the 9 Trinity Titoli, who I think I forgot to say her name, and Tweaked, they're going to go at it. And I think she's going to get a nice stalking position. She's a horse who seems to be moving in the right direction for me. And I really liked the race last time, even though she was beaten by seven lengths. It was a runaway winner, Lady Milagro, who ran a big figure that day. So she's actually in the stakes race later on. So if I had to make a top pick in here, it would be Lanfrancophile.
Yeah, I really have no problem with Lanfrancophile, and I think she could be a decent price once again, just given the fact that she's going out for some lower profile connections. Her jockey, Luis Rodriguez, not somebody that typically attracts a lot of money. That's partly why she was 28-1 last time, when she didn't look totally impossible and she got up for second behind Lady Milagro. So yeah, I think she makes plenty of sense in this race, and if she's not among the favorites, I think that's just another reason to upgrade her. As for those two to the outside, I'm not going to totally dismiss Tweaked. I have some questions about her. She goes out for connections that don't win a lot of races. So while it is a good sign that Trevor McCarthy is sticking on her when I think he did have some other options in this race, I just want to approach her with a little bit of caution. I agree that the rail seemed somewhat good on January 28th, probably not as strong a rail bias as we've seen on some other days at Aqueduct, but maybe that worked against her a little bit because we have seen some horses who had wider trips in that race and on that day come back to do well in subsequent starts. So that could be an excuse for Tweaked. I'm definitely not against Trinity Titoli at all. Rudy Rodriguez has 2 runners in this race. Actually, both of them are coming off maiden victories, and while I do prefer Trinity Titoli to Closing Deals, his other horse, Rudy has great stats with horses like this. Last out maiden winners in dirt sprints at Aqueduct, he's 12 for 36. That's a 33% win rate with a $3.86 ROI. So these horses that break their maidens at Aqueduct tended to come back and do pretty well. And I like Trinity Titoli a little bit more because I think that New York bred maiden race for the $40,000 tag that she's coming out of was actually okay. The runner-up in there was a pretty well-met first-time starter who took some money, and that horse challenged her in mid-stretch, and Trinity Titoli turned her away. Before that, she had faced some pretty good ones like Venti Valentine, who's obviously gone on to win a stakes and is arguably a Kentucky Oaks candidate, and even in her debut, Making My Move, a good horse. So I feel like this one might be slightly better than her overall record would indicate, and the pace projector shows tweaked on the lead with the aggressive apprentice Jose Gomez on Trinity Titoli. I would imagine that she'll be aggressively sent to secure the front here, and maybe that's enough to go gate to wire. We'll see, but I'd probably lean towards making her my top pick in here. Again, like I said, I'm not against Lanfranco-File, just the kind of horse where I'd want to let price be my guide. Craig, one horse that I didn't know what to do with in this race was the number 3 Beverly's Charge, who finished far behind Lanfranco-File last time when she got back on the dirt. If I could have some confidence that she could transfer her synthetic form to the dirt, she'd be a major contender in this race. I just don't know what to expect from her.
Yeah, I would agree. That one was a little puzzling to me because she had run well on the dirt before. She actually broke her maiden at Churchill in a 50,000 maiden claimer, won a nice allowance race at Indiana Downs or Indiana Grand. Won those in blowout fashion. So I don't know if she just didn't handle the Aqueduct surface. It's just hard to say, but the race was so bad, I had trouble latching on to her. So I'm not going to use her personally. And the other horse I definitely am not a fan of in here, and that's drawn toward the inside, is probably going to take money, is That's Pretty Nice. She's 6-1 on your morning line. Ran at fairly competitive speed figure in here, but I just think things are going to be pretty tough with all the speed outside. I mean, it's not like she's a front runner. She did sit a little bit off the pace, but the fractions were slow, and I just worried she's going to get shuffled back. Doesn't really have the speed figure to compete. So at the short price, she's one I don't want any parts of.
Yeah, we completely agree about her. I actually liked her a bit in her debut, and that was because the field looked so weak. It was kind of crying out for a first-time starter. I think some of the others that are stepping up off maiden wins have better prospects than she does. Let's move on to the next leg in the sequence. Race 8. It is a New York bred optional claiming 45,000. Non-winners of 2 other than is the allowance condition going that same 6 furlong distance. And Craig, this one seems pretty wide open. We've got a 12-horse field signed on, pace projector that's predicting a fast pace, and I kind of concur with that because I see quite a bit of speed in this field. Maybe it sets it up for a closer. I think the logical one is the number 1, 7 Lilies, drawn down towards the inside. Maybe he's the place you have to start in this race because, well, he's been competing at this level in his last 3 races and has just missed a couple times with 2 second-place finishes. Feels like he's getting into a pretty good situation here from a pace standpoint.
Yeah, it does. He's the first horse I started with, and not because he was the one. I did similar. I looked at that pace projector, and there is a lot of speed in this field for sure. He has competitive speed figures. He figures to get a nice trip from the inside. Rob Atras has been really hot lately, not just because he has that designation in TimeformUS, but that's usually a pretty good indicator. He's been winning a lot of races lately, so I've got no problems with that. My one concern would be the 6 furlongs is a turn back for this horse, but that might actually work out okay if the pace develops as expected. It's usually that's what you want to see for a turn back, a hot pace, if you're going to get that. So I got no problem with 7 Lilies other than the turf, other than the maybe the distance is too short and the price. But I'm definitely using that horse pretty prominently. As far as some other closers in here, I did look for a little bit longer price, and that was a couple slots to the outside. The horse Double Shot, who he's admittedly stepping up way in class, but I really liked how he won his last race. He came off a long layoff of almost a year. The pace wasn't very hot that day. It was a sloppy track at Aqueduct, and he ran by the field like they were standing still. I really liked how he finished off that race. I liked that he's 15-1 on the morning line. And he's another that definitely is going to be closing in here. That's just his running style for sure. He's done well at 6 furlong, so he's going to be my price play, and I would probably make him my top pick. Another horse I actually tried to make a case for, but he just never wins, is T Loves a Fight. he's a horse who looks like he's going to get a perfect setup in here. I do think you can kind of excuse his last race due to the way the track was playing. And if he runs back to the ones before, it would make him a contender. But he just never wins. So I'm going to use him more in vertical plays in the underneath slots. Maybe I could be convinced. It just depends how much my ticket's going to come out to, if I could use him as like a C-type horse. But he's not one that he just doesn't win. He's hard for me to latch on to, but he is going to be a big price. I do think he'll be running late. So he's interesting to me a little bit. As for the speed horses, if I were going to pick one of them in here, it would probably be Bustin' Timberlake. He came off a long layoff last time. Didn't do a whole lot of running, but he was outside on a day that the rail was probably a little bit better placed to me. And he has a couple races in here that will win this field. So maybe he could be the speed of the speed, and he would be the one speed horse I would consider.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of interesting horses. I'll kind of go in the same order that you did, Craig. Double Shot is a horse that I kind of was giving a look to as well, because he does have that running style that figures to be dangerous in this race. And to me, the most interesting thing about him is that he is making that jump up in class, because Linda Rice has run a lot of horses off the claim at this Aqueduct meet and really has not had a lot of success. I think I tweeted some numbers about it a few weeks ago. They're not pretty. She's just had a lot of horses run poorly off the claim for her, frankly. And recently she's been dropping horses down off the claim, I think more often than you see from her a lot. So it's interesting to me that she's so intent on protecting this horse and moving him up into a race where he's not in for the claiming tag. So it's an ambitious spot for him, but I think that's noteworthy. And like you said, he's going to get pace to close into. And with a rider like Jackie Davis named, I would imagine he's going to be a pretty substantial price in this race, because she's just not a jockey that attracts much money at all. And I was tweeting some ROIs for the different jockeys riding at Aqueduct this meet. I think about a week ago is when I last tabulated the numbers, and Jackie Davis had an ROI at Aqueduct of almost $3, which is kind of insane. But I think she's won like something like 9 or 10 races. Just not a jockey that rides many favorites. So when she wins, it's on big prices, kind of like this horse. We'll see what we get from him. He does really have to step up and run the race of his life. Yeah, we have the same opinion about that other closer, T Loves a Fight. I think the running count is up to 28 losses in a row. So he's a little tough for me to endorse, and it also seems like his form's just kind of tailed off lately. I do want to focus on some of the speed horses, because I don't want to totally dismiss them. Some of them are able to use a stalking running style and aren't necessarily going to be cooked in the pace. The horse that you mentioned last that I kind of don't want is that number 2, Bustin' Timberlake. He's a horse that had gotten to really good form a year ago when he first switched into the Charlton Baker barn, running that gigantic 122 TimeformUS speed figure, but that was kind of a weird day at Aqueduct. As I'm jogging my memory, I believe February 15th, 2021 was a big track bias day. And not that he took full advantage of the bias, but it just was a card that produced some weird results. And I don't put total stock in that number. And his return from the layoff last time, especially considering that he got bet down to favoritism, to me was pretty disappointing. It did seem like a track on February 20th, 2022 that looked a little rail biasy, but when I look back at the results and some of the runbacks really say otherwise, that horses who were outside have not improved, and horses that were riding the rail have come back and run the same speed figures, if not better. So I feel like maybe that was not a big rail bias day. So I'm not really willing to upgrade Bustin' Timberlake, especially if he takes money again. Look, I don't want to totally dismiss the horse that finished way ahead of him that day, the number 4, Writer's Regret. You might say, where did that 111 TimeformUS speed figure last time come from? But he's a horse who had shown glimmers of hope in the past, and Ralph D'Alessandro, trainer that typically does well at this meet. I know he's not having a lot of winners so far in 2022. I think he's just 1 for 24 at the current Aqueduct meet, but he's had some horses hit the board at decent prices, and I would not totally dismiss him as part of the pace. Another horse that I think we really should give a strong mention to is the number 7, Scacciatore, a horse that ran really well off the claim for Tom Morley last time, notably at the Open N1X level. I wouldn't say it was the toughest race at that condition, and this is probably more of a lateral move as he comes back into this unusually tough New York bred Dominers of 2 event, but he set the pace last time, and I thought hung on pretty well, beaten by American Monarch, who's a nice horse. So Tom Morley has excellent stats second off the claim, especially on dirt. So he's one that I would want to also give strong consideration to. It's just a really wide open race, Craig.
It is. And the pace projector is one where I totally agree that it's going to be a hot pace. I don't know if I agree. I won't say I disagree with the numbers and the order they have them in. I just think it's really murky who is going to get there. So if a horse like Scacciatore is able to outrun some of the others for the lead, I think he'd be dangerous. I just think it's really tricky trying to figure it out, and it may just come down to the break and jockey intention because I just don't really know what's going to happen in here, and that's kind of why I'm looking to the horses coming from off the pace.
Yeah, one more horse I want to mention that I kind of don't know what to do with, and I'll be honest, I have not yet finalized my picks for this race. I'm kind of all over the place, and I haven't totally decided yet. It's a difficult one to figure out, but I would want to use multiple horses in a pick 5 sequence. And the other horse that I do want to mention, Craig, is that horse all the way on the outside, the number 12, Reggae Music Man. He was really impressive last time, winning his N1X condition. He had a more favorable pace situation than he's probably going to encounter on Saturday, but that 110 TimeformUS speed figure puts him right in the mix, and he actually ran very well, setting an extremely fast pace 3 back. He might just be a horse that's doing very well right now for trainer Pat Reynolds, so I don't want to totally dismiss him either.
Yeah, that 110 stands out. It was his best figure of his career, and it kind of was improvement off that 1-3 back. The one before that, he kind of got shuffled back at the start. And the one upside for him, I think, is that outside post position, where a lot of times if you have a horse who does his best running on the lead and they can't make the lead, then the very next best spot to be is on the outside, because I think at times the horses are still running comfortably. So maybe that post will help him, and he would be the best of the speeds, because, yeah, I don't want to totally dismiss him either. If there's one race on this card where I'm going to spread in this pick 5, this is the one for me.
Let's move on to the stakes, the feature race on this Aqueduct Saturday card. It is the Cicada going 6 furlongs for the 3-year-old fillies, and just a field of 6 signed on, Craig, but it's a pretty evenly matched group. You can make a case for almost all of the runners in this race, or actually probably all of the runners. I had a tough time deciding on the morning line for this one. I did make the number 1 Rosebug the slight favorite at 5-2. She's turning back from a loss going 1 1/8. That probably just is too far for her, so I like her getting back to the sprint distance. But something interesting about this race is Rosebug is the only one that's not coming off a victory last time out, so we'll see what the public makes of that. But where would you want to start in this one?
Well, as you say, this is a race where they look pretty evenly matched on paper, but I actually settled on one horse pretty strongly, and she's going to be my single. And that's the outside horse, Lady Scarlet. And I say that, I'm not a guy who has to use a single in his pick 5s, but this is one that I just really like. She ran a really good 104 TimeformUS speed figure at Oaklawn last time out. It was second off the claim for Mike Maker, who tends to take a little while with his claims to get him in the top form. And if you watch the replay of that race, I don't think there was anything fluky about it at all. She looked like a winner every step of the way. She was running 4 wide down the backstretch. The jockey, Ramon Vasquez, didn't seem overly concerned that she was going to be caught wide on the turn. And I just love the way she ran by the field on the turn. Now, she did get a little tired late, but I think that's understandable. A really nice Brad Cox filly named Maritime was coming at her late, but she held her off pretty convincingly. And I just think that was a big effort. I like that he ships her into New York. I think he's showing some confidence there. And I just really like her in this spot. So she's the one for me.
Are you at all concerned about the trip she might pull in this race? Because she's never really had to pass horses. I mean, she's kind of run alongside them and gone by them. There are a couple of very fast fillies right to her inside in Lady Milagro and Manshun. And frankly, you could say that 5 of the 6 runners in this race want to be contesting the pace. So even though the pace projector is not flagging a fast pace, I could see this pace heating up a little bit. I guess maybe the positive for her is that she's drawn outside.
Yeah, I like that she's drawn outside. And just watching that replay, even though she was up close, I don't think she really had to be there. She was just doing it because she's so quick early. And you can see the fraction was pretty quick. We don't have it coded in red because it was a pretty fast race overall. But that early pace figure of a 119, it's hard for me to imagine it will be a whole lot faster in here. And I'm not going to, she's able to handle that pace. So if she was drawn inside, it would be more of a concern for me, but it's not here.
Yeah, I'm not way against her. She's not my top pick in this race, but I'm glad that you have such a strong opinion because I think this is one where a lot of people would be tempted to spread, even though it is such a small field. Let's touch upon some of the other horses, Craig. I think an interesting wild card in this race is the number 5 Monshun going out for Ray Handel. She looked really good in her debut last summer at Saratoga. I guess the problem is, where has she been since then? I mean, it's nice to see her come back in a stakes race, but it's hard to know what to expect off that lengthy layoff.
Yeah, I looked at her. I gave her some consideration because, as you know, I think an important thing for bettors to do is not take the speed figures literally when you see a horse who hasn't raced in so long, particularly a 2-year-old who's now turned 3. With any improvement, you would expect them to run quite a bit faster if she comes back ready to go. But my concern there is Ray Handel is not a guy who runs horses off the layoff all that well. I'm sure it's probably by design. So it just seems like a spot where maybe she's prepping for something else to me if she's if she's even the horse she was last year. She's certainly been working out quite a bit. She should be ready to go, but it's just not really his forte to bring him back in spots like this and win. So
kind of getting at where my pick in this race, I do view this pace as having the potential to really heat up, especially given the way some of those recent maiden winners won their recent starts with Sweet Solari and Exaltris contesting the pace. I know they're not shown up front on the pace projector, but with inside post positions, I would imagine their riders are going to try to get aggressive here. So I'm viewing the number 1 Rosebug as the closer in a race that's just loaded with speed, and I'm hoping that she does work out that trip from off the pace, kind of like she did in her career debut. She's a little bit dirtied up, I think, because she's had a couple races that I just think didn't really suit her. She ran fine on the turf, but I believe she's a better dirt horse where she's made now 3 of her 5 starts. And last time out in that Busanda, number 1, she does not want to go a mile and an eighth. And number 2, January 23rd was a big rail bias day at Aqueduct, and she was never on the rail. She was in the 2 to 3 path the entire way. I think you want horses that were outside in that race, so I'm not going to hold that against her. Prior to that, she was very impressive, winning her maiden victory in the slop, going the 7 furlongs. She stalked the pace that day, but they weren't going that quickly on the front end. I think that she's perfectly capable of coming from a little farther off the pace, as she did in her career debut. And I'm going back to that race at Saratoga last year because even though she was 4th, that was a strong race where she was behind Gerrymander, a subsequent stakes winner. The 3rd place finisher, Amo Ray, is subsequently graded stakes placed. I think the same goes for Distinctly Possible, who was 2nd. I want to say she was 2nd in the Alcibiades in her next start. So that was a pretty deep race. And I just feel like Rosebug is finally getting to focus on what she's always wanted to do, and that's be a dirt sprinter.
Yeah, I've got no problem with Rosebug. If I didn't like Lady Scarlet so much, he would be my second pick in here. The main reason I like Lady Scarlet is the big speed figure. I think it was totally legit. Rosebug is going to have to improve a bit to match that. But if things get hot, I could see that happening. And, no problem with that. I just don't want to spend a lot of money on this pick 5, so that's why I kind of settled on Lady Scarlet as the race I was going to go narrow in. But yeah, I could definitely see Rosebug, if things get hot, working out a nice trip and running them down.
Yeah, and I didn't mention, Bilmont actually has very good stats with turnbacks on the dirt and stakes races, particularly with his 3-year-olds. We didn't mention Lady Milagro, who might be the fastest of all in the early going. She's stepping way up in class, but she's got a speed figure that's right on par with the last number of Lady Scarlet. So I didn't put her in the mix, but I'm not going to be shocked if she's maybe the biggest price on the board and gets a big piece of this. And the number 3, Craig, Exaltris, from a speed figure standpoint, she doesn't quite stack up, but I just want to throw out a stat for people. Chad Brown, over the past 2 years at Aqueduct, with last out maiden winners on the dirt, is 13 for 18. That's a 72% win rate with an ROI above $4. So that's kind of a crazy high win rate for Chad Brown. Interesting. Not all of those were in stakes races, but Exaltrus is a horse that I would not want to totally dismiss on that stat alone.
Yeah, that's pretty scary stat. You could probably spend months looking for another trainer situation where somebody is 13 for 18.
All right, Craig, let's close things out with this war of a last race. 14 horses. Well, it'll be limited to 14 horses. There are 16 drawn, but 2 on the also eligible list. They're signed on to go the 6 furlong distance. I believe this entire pick 5 sequence has been at 6 furlongs. This one's a maiden claiming $25,000 for the New York bred fillies, and it seems pretty wide open. I kind of defaulted to a first-time starter as the morning line favorite with the number 9 backed by gold, just because Jorge Abreu wins with these types of horses. I have no information about this horse. It just feels like one that has to be considered dangerous given the lack of quality among all of our competition.
Yeah, this is a big field, but I think we're kind of in the same boat here where I'm not spreading too deep in a race like this because I think there's a lot of filler. There's a lot of horses who just don't look like they're ever going to win a race, at least on the NYRA circuit. So I kind of narrowed it down. I started with the horse who's run the most, who has actually run, who looks the strongest on paper, and that's the 12 Kiss Me Smile. She at least showed some speed for Mike Maker first time out. He's a guy who doesn't win a lot first time out. I would expect some improvement from her in this spot. So of the ones who have run, I'm going to use the 12 Kiss Me Smile. But for the 2 horses I'm going to lean on most heavily, it would definitely be a couple first-time starters. One of them is the one you mentioned, the 9 horse backed by gold, Jose Abreu. I looked him up with maiden claimers, 3-year-old, or not 3-year-old, just maiden claimers. He's 6 for 27, comes out to 22%. 3.11 ROI. He did have one big price, 20-1 winner, which is kind of inflating that ROI a bit. But no doubt he can win in his spots. The 6 for 27 isn't any kind of fluke. And the other one, and I guess I'll make it my top pick just because of a more of a value situation, is the 7 horse Lady Shanghai Trevor, I assume is how you say that. Trying to read through all those letters jumbled together. Trainer Paul Barrow, he's not a super well-known trainer on the NYRA circuit, I don't believe. But when I looked him up in Formulator, he has some pretty good stats in these situations. He's over the last 5 years, he's only run 15 in these spots, but he has 4 winners from those. A 3.35 ROI per $2. I should mention that. That's what Formulator does them in, so that's how I talk about them. And when you look at the 4 winners, none of them are bomb type horses. All were less than 10-1, from the 4 up to the 9-1 range. So she's just one I think is interesting based on that. And you're more of a NYRA guy than me. Am I missing the boat on Paul Barrow? Because I see he has a ton of starts. I just don't remember seeing him in a lot of New York races.
No, he's more of a Finger Lakes trainer, and I admit I have not looked up that stat. I don't have it in front of me. I would imagine most of the success has come at Finger Lakes. I believe his NYRA stats are not that strong, but he starts a lot of long shots, and I believe that this horse is going to be a pretty big price. So far be it from me, Craig, to talk you off a horse that's going to be upwards of 10-1 in a race like this where it looks totally wide open. So she's definitely one that I think you can consider. As for that other first-time starter backed by gold, who we were kind of covering, she is a 4-year-old, whereas I think most of the other firsters in this race are 3-year-olds. For whatever that's worth, she's been in training for a very long time. When I go on XBTV, I can pull up some workouts on her from the summer of 2020. I think at the time she was working okay with some horses that turned out to be better than she is, or at least not running for the $25,000 tag, but who knows what to make of workouts from 2 years ago. So yeah, she's definitely a player in this race. We'll see how short she goes off. There are 2 others with experience that I want to highlight and I would use prominently in this race. One of them is the number 10, Tasty Wave. She had an excuse first time out, and in a race like this with so little quality, I don't need a very big excuse. And the one for her is that she got squeezed back at the start. It was a big field. She broke with the group, but just kind of got shuffled back immediately after the start and wound up about 3 lengths behind the rest of the field. She didn't do a whole lot of running after that, but she was wide the entire way. That was that Trinity to Tolly maiden race that we talked about a bit earlier. I think that's a tougher maiden claimer than a lot of others are coming out of. So that's enough for me to give Tasty Wave a big look in this race. And the other horse that's probably going to be an even bigger price that I would probably lean towards making my top pick in this race just from a value standpoint is the number 2, Lost Anchor. This is a horse that I think is better than she looks based on her results. She ran a competitive speed figure 3 back on January 14th when she got that 70 TimeformUS speed figure, a number that definitely puts her in the mix among those that have run in here, arguably one of the better speed figures anybody's earned. 2 back, or I should say that number was from December 9th. 2 back on January 14th, that was a day when she drew the far outside post position in a field of 14, didn't break that sharply, and was just playing catch up the entire way while going extremely wide, so I can be somewhat forgiving of that effort. And then last time out, they tried to go a mile with her. She doesn't want to go a mile, and furthermore, that February 4th was a day that featured a pronounced dead rail, and her rider, the apprentice, stuck her right down in that rail path. So it's not that surprising to me that she lost that race by over 20 lengths, just given the trip that she got. I think she's better than she looks, and she could play out as the inside speed here, and I want to have some play going through the horse that I think could be leading this field early, because I'm not going to be surprised if there's not a whole lot of passing going on in this race.
Well, I like that you brought up Lost Anchor because it made me take a closer look. And given that start you talk about on January 14th, being only 3 lengths behind in a 120 pace figure would certainly make her a player. And here we have that coded in bright red. So I think you're going to make me spread a little bit more in this race. I certainly agree about the last race. It was a terrible rail. She doesn't want to go that far. So you give me something to think about. Maybe I'll spread a little bit more than I originally planned. I do think this is a pretty wide open race. I don't think you want to take short prices, really. So I've got no problem with any of those.
All right, Craig, let's sum it up a little bit. I should mention as we wrap things up, there is some rain predicted in the forecast for Saturday. Originally, it looked like a sunny day. Now they're saying some possible thunderstorms, but I don't think it's going to be some total washout or anything. I think there's at most a quarter inch of rain predicted, so hopefully that doesn't affect things too much. But Craig, I'll let you go first this time. Just kind of summarize how you might approach this sequence.
So in the first leg, I think Tin Pan Alley is a horse you have to use. I don't particularly care for Eminency. I'm not going to use that one. If I get beaten the first leg by that one, so be it. And then I like the 2 second-time starters even a little bit more than Tin Pan Alley. The 7 Modern Midas and Flowing River. So most of my play is going to go through those 3 horses. Well, all of it. They're the only 3 I'm going to use. In the 7th race, I think this one, it's a pretty big field, but I do think there's a lot of filler in here. I landed on LaFranco File. I think the pace is going to be hot, but I also am going to use Tweaked and Trinity Titoli as the speed horses who are most likely to stick around. In that 8th race, that allowance race, I think this one is another that's definitely going to have a hot pace. I think you have to start with 7 Lilies coming out for Hot Rob Actress. But I also like a Price and Double Shot who's going to be, closed into that slow pace, moves up in class for Linda Rice, as you noted. And if it gets fast, this is the one horse I'm really confident will be running late. I did mention I would use T Loves a Fight in vertical plays, not in my win plays. And as far as the speeds, I'm a little more forgiving of Bustin' Timberlake. If one of them's going to stick around, I would use him more as like a C-type. In the feature, I'm going all in on Lady Scarlet. I just really liked their last race at Oaklawn. I think that replay is worth a watch. Just thought that 104 was totally legit. She could probably, I think she has a bigger race in her here. I like that she draws outside. So I'm going to sink or swim with Lady Scarlet in that one. And then in the last race, I'm going to use those 2 first-time starters, Lady Shanghai Trevor, backed by Gold. I'll probably use a little Kiss Me Smile. And now you've talked me into a couple other longer prices, which doesn't take much to talk me into big price horses in the 2 Lost Anchor and the 10 Tasty Wave.
Well, Craig, I like your general strategy. I think we have a very similar one, though we're diverging in the stakes race. I think we're both leaning on specific horses there. Yeah, we have a similar strategy in the first race of the sequence, race 6. I think we've got the same 3 horses, Tin Pan Alley, Modern Midas, and Flowing River. Modern Midas would be my top pick, but I like Flowing River as well. We'll see how the prices shake out. I'll just say, if Tin Pan Alley gets bet down to 2-1, 9-5, 8-5, maybe he's a horse I'd want to downgrade a little bit, because this feels like a pretty wide open race, and I would not want to take a big hit in value in the first leg if that horse takes all the money, which I think is possible, just given the trip and Chad Brown. Race 7, I'm mostly towards the outside. I'm going to try to get through this race with the 8, 9, and 10, Lanfranco File, Trinity Totoli, and Tweaked. The others are kind of on a tier below for me, so I'm going to really focus on those 3 horses towards the outside. Race 8, I'll be honest, I'm kind of still deciding how I want to sort them out, but the horses that interest me are 7 Lilies, Double Shot, Writer's Regret, Scotchatorre, and going all the way to the outside, Reggae Music Man. They're the most interesting horses to me, maybe even a little bit of Running with Scissors, who we didn't mention. I'm not going to use them all as A's. I'll try to split them up a little bit, probably trying to emphasize some horses who are bigger prices, but I'll be publishing my picks for Naira, as I always do, so you can check that out. But yeah, that's a pretty tough race to figure out, so I'll want to have some coverage there. Race 9, the stakes, the Cicada, I'm going to mostly go through Rosebug. I really like the way this race is going to set up for her, and I think the turn back is just what the doctor ordered. So kind of like with Craig, who's leaning heavily on a horse in this race, I'm going to make it Rosebug for me. And then race 10, I'm going to close things out with my 2 long shots, Lost Anchor and the number 10, Tasty Wave, and I'll also use that first, her backed by Gold, who just seems pretty logical. So Craig, hopefully we have some luck in this one. It feels like a sequence that could pay a lot. Hopefully it's not dominated by favorites. Sometimes it feels like when these look totally wide open, that tends to happen. But I feel like this one could go a number of different ways. So it does feel like one that if you make an investment in it, you'll probably get a pretty worthwhile payout.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's a reason you kind of were a little leery when you looked at the field, but that it might be too tough. But I think it's a really good sequence and offers some value. And I really enjoyed handicapping this card. It's one I may not have taken as deep a look at if we didn't do it. It's kind of nice to get a break off the Triple Crown trail. I assume we'll be right back on that next week with the big card at the fairgrounds. But sometimes you forget this time of year there is other racing going on outside of that road to the Derby and the Oaks.
Well, we'll talk about some of that next week. And before we do next week's forecast, talking about that Derby prep, we'll be recapping some of this week's races on the TimeformUS Pacecast coming up next Tuesday. We'll definitely mention those graded stakes taking place at Oaklawn on Saturday. We'll probably have a recap of the Cicada as well as other stakes races taking place around the country. So, Craig, nice to handicap this sequence with you. As always, remember that you can catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Everybody, thanks for listening this week, and make sure to tune in for that TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday.